Good night, ladies and gentlemen. Good night, Barbadians. I want to thank you for joining us. Over the course of the last 2 days, we had unprecedented events with respect to the loss of power island-wide, not only yesterday, but then regrettably again this morning. I'm advised that the last time on which this has happened was January 2018, and indeed it has brought back to those who know of other instances across the world, such as the blackouts in New York City and elsewhere, where these kinds of events can literally bring a city or a country to its knees. In our case, as a country, it is even more worrisome because we are surrounded by sea and we do not have the luxury of being able to turn to a neighboring state or to neighboring boroughs or neighboring precincts to be able to ask them to help supply the electricity. It is against this background that this morning, when I addressed the people of this country, that I said that I had requested as a matter of urgency that the chairman of Emira Caribbean meet with my government and the officials in order for us to have clarity as to what has transpired with respect to the loss of generating capacity island-wide and then regrettably to the repeat this morning. Light and Power will speak for itself shortly as to the status, but suffice it to say that I'm informed that 90% of the country is back with power and operating. While that is absolutely good news, this government will not accept anything less than absolute resilience and redundancy in the provision of power to the people of this nation. We have worked too hard as a government over the course of the last 18 months to stabilize this nation from its greatest threat, which was in fact the value of our dollar and which would have decimated every household and every Barbadian business as we go forward. We have had to deal with other aspects of the lost decade, as we have come to call it, whether it is in terms of trucks, sanitation trucks that were not bought for over 10 years, whether it was relation to buses that were not bought for over 10 years, or even as I look at the generating capacity of the Barbados Light and Power, the last outside of the plant at Trent's, the last major generators bought in this country were in 2005. We cannot plan out this country's future on an if or a but, or on the basis of us hoping that we can continue to repair old plant that ought to be retired. We have expressed our views frankly and respectfully to the Barbados Light and Power because we also recognize that they are a private company, but that they have been in Barbados for over 100 years. But for that reason, to whom much is given, much is expected. And we believe that this responsibility to the country's development at this particular point in time is even more critical because we are working our way out as a nation to be able to reclaim the path of development. Tonight, as we speak, we have had investors in this country ready to put down 2 major hotels. One of them is in the middle of a town hall meeting with respect to the Hyatt with 440 rooms. Others are also visiting. So we are very clear that there is nothing other than the loss of life inappropriately or corrupt practices that will be taken off of the table to resolve this problem. I think we have shared our perspective as a government with the Barbados Light and Power. They have agreed in principle that we will work together to make sure that whatever is done, including 24-hour days, including multiple teams, that we will look and revisit every assumption that has been made that would otherwise see new generation capacity not coming on board for another 12 to 18 months. This, we believe, is not tenable. We are going to manage this over the course of the next few days, but we have enough information before us to know that the question will be whether they can procure immediately tomorrow generating capacity or whether they will have to rent in the interim for a few weeks, have the generating capacity brought on the island while they procure the permanent one that will give the country at least the comfort of another minimum of 30 megawatts of power, what they call the energy bridge. Everyone knows that we are in the middle of a climate crisis and that ultimately by 2030 we will move to full renewable energy. But until such time, we have to accept that there is going to be a hybrid and that there will be a bridge. And to that extent, therefore, when we look at the various generators that Light and Power has shared with us, and I think they have accepted, that other than the ones purchased in 2005, there are some that were purchased when I was in primary school, and that those would have to be replaced even though there have been attempts to repair them in the past, and even though the life of those repairs may take them for another year or two. That is not acceptable. This government must give investors, must give Barbadians, must give school children, must give pensioners, must give everyone the comfort that the things to which we have become accustomed with respect to access to light, access to water, access to all other basic services that have been compromised over the course of the last decade must be returned to normalcy, and not only normalcy, but to standards that become the envy of not just the region but the world. And our government will work to make sure that that happens with all of the relevant players. It is against this background that we've also thanked the Water Authority for procuring 11 generators. If we didn't have that, the situation today and yesterday would have been far worse, and that they must now expedite and continue the acquisition of the additional generating capacity, because we do not believe ever that after 53 years of independence that we must have a situation where our water supply is completely dependent on our power supply, and that in today's world where we have the ability to have renewable energy and batteries, with the cost of battery supplies going down, that we should have independent power supply for the water stations. In the same way that we have given the commitment to the people of the North that we are going to resolve their issue by putting in additional pumping capacity at Vineyard, a new reservoir at Stuart Hill, and running pipes down the East Coast so as to ensure that the lower level elevations have a dedicated supply. Because the bad news is that the country has been paying for the last 3 years for water at groves that it is not using. So that in a take or pay, we are paying for 3 million gallons a day, but we are not using more than about 1.5 million gallons of that a day. And this is the kind of waste that we have now to wrestle to the ground as a matter of urgency. In addition, therefore, to that priority project, and in addition to the woeful state of affairs with respect to the reservoirs, which we had to argue, which we had to commit immediately to providing resources as a result of a report that came in at the beginning of summer, that we are in a position to stabilize aspects of the function of the Water Authority. To have to do this after a Water Authority has spent $65 million on a building and more than $140 million on meters in circumstances where they are still not smart is regrettable. But I have learned in life that you have to play the hand that you have been dealt. Tonight is not the night for the allocation of blame, because complaining and blame will not help stabilize the situation. And what matters is that those people who need access to electricity will have it, that those people who have to go to school and go to work will be able to do so, and that Bajans can go about their business in the normal way, in the same way that when the prison burnt, I said that the strategic objective of this government must always be that people must be able to go about their affairs without any hinder or hampering, such that we fix the problems while they do that. I think that the Barbados Light and Power and the government have recognized, therefore, that this is a crisis that requires 24/7, and the public will be kept up to date as we go forward with respect to it. To come tonight and to say immediately that we are going to buy something from X place and Y place is unrealistic, because we are in the process now of asking them to examine all of the options. Their original procurement schedule would have meant, as I said, 12 to 18 months. We have said that is completely unacceptable, and we have agreed that we can do that in a shorter period of time. Whether it will be a combination of rental and procurement or straight procurement will be known within the next 48 hours. But we are on the same page with respect to aspects of that new generating capacity. As it relates to the existing problems and to the contamination in the fuel, Water Authority and the Barbados National Oil Company are in a better position to speak to that. I am not an engineer, but was it phenols that have been found that they believe have impaired the functioning of their plant, and they will speak to you about where else it has happened in the world. As to whether there are liability issues, those things will be dealt with another day. Our immediate interest is to stabilize the situation in this country, because what we experienced yesterday and today must not happen again as we move into independence, as we move into Christmas, as we move into 2020, as we move into hosting major events next year. And this country has worked too hard. You have given up too much as Bajans for us now to be impaired in this manner. And I think we are all agreed, therefore, that we will work beyond the call of duty to stabilize the situation. As to the other issues, as to the disadvantaging or the impairment of people's ability to do things, the Light and Power understands they have a board meeting tomorrow, and I fully anticipate that the Light and Power will speak to the country in a way that will give the country a sense that they understand that people have not just been inconvenienced, but that their affairs have been impaired over the course of the last 48 hours. But we are a country that is fair, and we will not therefore seek to speak on behalf of the Barbados Light and Power at this stage. Suffice it to say, however, that we will defend the public interest in every respect as necessary. With respect to the matters of the contaminants, I think we've agreed that we have to be able to bleed what may be the suspect fuel and ensure that cleaner fuel goes in, so that in the event of any further issues, we can minimize it for the country going forward. With those few words, and I'll come back if necessary, I'd like to invite the Barbados Light and Power to be able to speak. And I'd like not only Mr. Blackman to speak, because in fairness to Mr. Blackman, this is a broader issue that I believe, and that's why I'm thankful that after my request to have and meet with the chairman of EMIRA, that he has graciously agreed to come immediately, and that we were able therefore to resolve for us a way forward potentially, but it is going to require management over the course of the next few days. We have set up a subcommittee of public officials that will, because we will not wait for a day or two to pass to find out that we have issues, and we have agreed that there must be continuous dialogue with a subcommittee representing the government, and that subcommittee will consist of Ms. Francine Blackman, the Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Energy and Water Utilities, the Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Public Works, Maintenance and Transport, Mr. Mark Cummins, Dr. Hugh Seeley, who is a consultant advisor to the Government of Barbados on water, energy and climate change matters, and Mr. James Brown, who is the CEO of the Barbados National Oil Company. They will continue in between now and when I meet again with the Barbados Light and Power tomorrow afternoon at 4:30 to be able to manage this, because this is a process that will also see them bringing in teams from as far as Korea, and also ensuring that we can engage with all who we have to engage, both on procurement, rental, or logistics, which means effectively a 24-hour operation. The country must know that we will do all in our power to bring back stability and normalcy, because this is not the Barbados that we have come to know or want to know. So with those few words, I'd like to ask Mr. Blackman, as well as the chairman of EMIRA, to be able to speak to the country. Thank you.
Thank you, Prime Minister.
That's all right, go ahead. Simplest thing. Go ahead, Mr. Blackman. You're not going to miss good night.
No problem. Thank you, Prime Minister. And first, let me begin by apologizing to our customers and to Barbados for the inconvenience, loss of productivity that our customers would have experienced over the last couple of days. We had a couple extraordinary events between yesterday and today that led to island-wide outages yesterday morning and again this morning while we were going through the restoration. They originated with the first one with a failed switch in one of our substations adjacent to the Spring Garden plant. And then again this morning, as we were going through restoration and running very close with little reserve, we experienced another fault at the plant that resulted in the shutdown again today. Again, want to apologize for that inconvenience. We've had the Prime Minister has already addressed many of the actions that we've agreed to take, and we will be coming back to the media over the next couple of days to confirm those actions and the status. But what I wanted to do was acknowledge the work that the teams at Barbados Light and Power, who under a lot of pressure over the last couple of days have gone above and beyond to restore. Right now, we have full restoration of the network and
100%?
teams 100% at the moment. And the teams would have worked very, very hard over the last few days, and in fact, the last few weeks, because we have been experiencing problems, as the Prime Minister outlined in her remarks in relation to fuel, that have put the system under severe stress. And we've been working through that for a number of weeks. It has come to a head with the events of yesterday and today, and severely impacted the ability and the time required to restore after the outages yesterday and again this morning. We've agreed to work with government and the other stakeholders on a number of actions, and you'll be hearing more about that within the next couple of days. In relation to the fuel contamination issue that we've spoken about, and as recently as around 6 o'clock when I would address the media, we have agreed to some actions with the NOCL. In fact, we'll be starting tonight working on some of those solutions, and we will also be looking at bringing in expertise to help us both from the standpoint of being able to effect repairs as pumps go down or equipment is affected, to have sufficient resources and expertise supplementing what we have to be able to effect those repairs as quickly as possible. So once again, apologies. We are working very hard to ensure that we don't have a recurrence, but it is a very delicate situation at the moment until the fuel situation is resolved, and you can rest assured that we're working with the teams to resolve the situation.
Are there any questions?
Hi, good night, Mr. Blackman. Riding back from Barbados today. So for the last 2 days, Barbadians have been working to find their houses, businesses with electricity. I know that there are some plans in place to address the outages, but as it relates to the short term, tomorrow, can Barbadians be assured that when they wake up tomorrow or during the day, there won't be any outages, or is that something you can assure?
Yeah, at this point in time, we have sufficient capacity to satisfy the demand. But as I mentioned just now, it is a delicate situation because the units, a significant portion of our units run on heavy fuel oil. And those units have been shutting down from time to time due to fuel equipment failures. And so we've been working to ensure that when one fails, we have it back up as quickly as possible, and before the next one is down. If you have more than one off at the same time, then it does put us in a shortfall. So the situation is delicate. Right now we have sufficient capacity, and we have the teams in place, and we'll be looking at bringing in additional expertise as well to help us address the situation and manage while we work on quick and short-term fixes in relation to expediting additional capacity on the network.
Let me help the country, because Mr. Blackman, sometimes you have to give people the steps in order to give people confidence. The bottom line is Mr. Blackman is absolutely correct when he said to you earlier that it is delicate. But delicacy is not good enough for the government at this stage. We need resilience and we need redundancy. And to that extent, therefore, we know that one of two things will happen. If we have to rent, we are satisfied that we can rent capacity to act as a buffer with out of Florida, with the ships, a dedicated ship being sourced by Emira in order to be able to get generating capacity here. Luckily, they have already started work on a site before, and therefore that will mean that they can move much quicker. They have also identified a contractor who the government has requested will work 24 hours a day to put down the pipes that would be necessary for that additional generating capacity. The ship to the extent once it is procured will take 12 days to get here, and then working around the clock they will take 10 to 12 days in order to install and commission. Now those things are always subject to variations, and only God can tell us otherwise. The bottom line, therefore, is we have an indicative timeline on what it is to rent. With respect to immediate, and that is without prejudice to them having to purchase and to get something here immediately. Emira and the chairman has made the point, and perhaps he can speak, there is always excess capacity of people who may not, for whatever reason, may not be taking a plant, and therefore we are looking. Barbados National Oil Company has also helped in the search, and we've identified a potential set of plants in Florida. The Light and Power now has to speak to them between tonight and tomorrow, and for us to determine whether that is the best route. If it is, then it means that we can get that immediate purchase rather than having to rent. Because if we can purchase, it is the better solution, as you will recognize, in terms of the recovery than having to rent an asset that is not yours and then to turn around and procure. In either instance, the government has made it clear that that new capacity has to be in place as a matter of urgency in the next few weeks rather than a 12 to 18 month period. Now it means that we will have to work hand in glove to be able to make this happen. And I want to be able to give you the assurance, because the absolute comparison that others are making is to the sewage crisis. The last time that there was a crisis in the country, the last government looked at the sewage crisis and did not mobilize the necessary skills and bring it to fruition. This cabinet that I chair every week still takes a weekly report on the South Coast and Bridgetown sewage situation, because even though we have resolved the issue with a temporary fix, until such time as we have a permanent fix in terms of a permanent outfall and a new plan, the government of Barbados is not letting go of this mission critical issue. Equally, with respect to the hurricane preparedness, when we came to office, not even this building had a generator or a water tank, not even Government House. So that the Governor General, nobody, the critical installations. And we have made a determination that these things are unacceptable. And with respect to the reservoirs that we are repairing, the report that was commissioned in November, told us this summer, and not everything that we come to the country with, that those reservoirs would not withstand a Category 1 storm. Now, how does a country get to this point when its infrastructure is allowed to deteriorate such as it has? And we therefore have made the determination that we are literally Barbados is not a place where we can deal with wants before we deal with needs. And we are therefore working assiduously to be able to restore the integrity of our infrastructure and the institutions. Now, if we had known that we were likely to have problems, whether it is through fuel contaminants or whatever, we would have dealt with it beforehand. But the bottom line is that now that we know, we are insisting that it be done as a matter of urgency, because while you before might have been able to take a chance, I don't take chances when it comes to certain things. And the country must have that assurance that its government will stand in the breach to defend the public interest and to make sure that people who want to come here, people who live here, and people who are required to work here can do so with the comfort that they are doing so in a society that is safe, that is providing reliable infrastructure, accessible infrastructure, and affordable conditions under which people can live.
Why has it taken Light and Power so long to deal with an issue which you should have foreseen that this would have happened eventually? And what assurance can you give Barbadians? I mean, you're a monopoly company. We've heard about going to the fair trade and asking for an increase in fuel. Barbadians are not going to feel good knowing that this situation has arisen.
Yeah, the issue that we're encountering now with the fuel is not something that has been around for a long time. In fact, we would have received lab reports last week, I believe it was, that identified the contamination and the specific contaminants. This is not something that we would have beforehand had knowledge of. We were experiencing challenges on the heavy fuel oil plant with leaks and sticking pumps and so on. but it is only recently that we've identified the specific cause and source. And so now that that has been identified, we are working with our fuel suppliers to put measures in place to address the situation. And in parallel, we're effecting the repairs on the engines and to make sure that they're on and remain reliable. But we need to address the fuel quality issue in order to ensure that they remain on and reliable.
I think we're going to ask the oil company to speak on that. But without prejudice to that, let me also say, Roger, in fairness, I think that the question that the journalists really wanted to know is why you have not retired some of the pieces of generating capacity at an earlier stage. Because the truth is that a lot of this stuff is past their retirement date. In some instances, you've chosen to extend.
Yes.
But that is the question that the public needs to know.
Okay. In terms of the decision around replacement versus reinvestment or life extension, there are a number of factors. One of which, a few years ago, there was a decision made to develop waste to energy and biomass, which would have been at a significant capacity.
But what are you talking about? Because I want you to be very clear on this issue. Waste to energy where?
Waste to energy at Vaucluse was the proposal a few years back for a waste energy plant to produce something in the order of 40 megawatts and a biomass plant at Andrews to produce.
What waste to energy plant was that?
That was the Cahill plant.
Oh.
Yeah. And so plans were in place for that capacity. The government at the time had identified that location and that capacity, as well as biomass plant, 20 megawatts of capacity, and that generating capacity would have allowed us to retire some of the existing generating capacity that is in place. So in light of that indication and those decisions that had been made at the time, it was prudent for us to reinvest in what we had, coupled with the fact that the country was on a path of renewable energy and decarbonization. Generating investments tend to be 25, 30-year investments, and you have to consider those very carefully in an environment where within 10 years you're going to be carbon free. So given that those big renewable projects were earmarked, given that the country was clearly on a path of decarbonization and going to zero carbon, and now in fact it's 2030, the decision was taken at the time to reinvest and extend the life of the fossil fuel plant that is already there. The caveat being we always recognize that we would need some level of fossil fuel investment, and that was why we had identified the Clean Energy Bridge, which we've spoken about in the media and the press for at least a year now. We've been speaking about that. That's a 33 megawatt plant that the Prime Minister mentioned earlier. We would be looking to expedite and have that in place sooner. But the decisions around that had to be made very carefully and in the context of a situation where we are going to a carbon-free environment. Those plant investments, just to reiterate, are 25, 30-year investments. So, it's not something that you will...
Except that I think that we need to pause.
Yeah.
Because the country will not accept that its whole generating capacity was at point of retirement.
No.
So that is the major issue. And in fairness, I suppose you had to listen to the government, but plasma gasification has not been successful in any part of the world.
Yeah. That was our advice at the time as well, Prime Minister, but we couldn't ignore the information and instructions we were given.
I'd like to ask the Barbados National Oil Company to address the issue of the contaminants, Mr. Brown, and just shift the things there, Roger, please.
Just put it on that and slide it across. Just put it on.
Mr. Brown, you may have to speak loud enough for everybody to hear.
Good evening. We were notified by the Barbados Light and Power last week, Monday, that they had some concerns about the fuel that we were importing. Now, BNOCL has been importing fuel oil since the early 2000s, and this is the first time when we had significant issues with the fuel. Now, immediately what we decided to do, we met with the Light and Power. We agreed with our suppliers to do extensive pre-testing of the fuel to ensure that the quality of the fuel is to the standards that the utility want. Now, these tests are new tests because
Which tests are these?
The concerns that the utility power has is that there are some new streams of phenols and aldehydes that are impacting the fuels. Now, when we procured the fuel, these weren't a concern, but over the last couple of months, these products have entered into the fuel oil, and we have addressed the matter with our suppliers to ensure that no longer we will be importing these in our fuels. We have 2 suppliers. We've addressed the issue with both of them. So from now on, or from early as last week, we shouldn't be those streams should not be a concern to utility power. We just have to deal with what we have here on land, and we have come up with a plan how we will treat to that product as well.
I must tell the country that I have requested the Barbados Light and Power, and I'll go with them now to do a site visit, but I've requested the Barbados Light and Power to look at seeing how we can bleed the tank, that has what they suspect to be contaminated fuel. They believe it's about 4,000 cubic meters left.
Yeah, 405.
4,000 out of the 5,000 cubic meters in that tank. We've identified a tank at Esso in order to be able to transport the fuel. And the biggest issue now is a logistics issue for us to ensure that we can move it in the shortest possible time while ensuring the safety of those who are working to be able to move it. I would have expressed earlier that while the Barbados Light and Power teams have been working 16-hour days, our ability to bring in the additional engineers will allow us to move to a 24-hour work cycle, and therefore there has been that commitment from the Barbados Light and Power to have those additional personnel in the country at the shortest possible time to ensure that we can bring back that stability, to move from the delicate stage, the word that Mr. Blackman used, to one that is more robust and resilient. I want to also thank the Barbados Light and Power for agreeing to meet with those people who are on island and to be able to give them the assurance of the investors that this is not part and parcel of our future, and that this regrettably is something that we will hopefully see the last of, and that we are building a resilient network. Even as we speak, the government is in conclusion with its negotiations with the Barbados Light and Power on the licenses, and therefore it is in everybody's interest to get this right. On the issue of compensation, as I said, we will await the board of the Barbados Light and Power meeting, because this is still a country governed by the rule of law. With respect to any other issues, are there any other questions? You wanted to say something, Mr. There you go. Oh,
My apologies.
sorry, one last thing. Minister Cattle was meeting with the Inter-American Development Bank in Washington, D.C. today, and I put in a request this morning to have her request of the Inter-American Development Bank the identification of 2 independent consultants that will allow us to be able to make assessments as to the robustness of our network and to the efficiency of what we have and what we need to do. And we've done so because we believe that even if something was wrong with one of us, and how much ever confidence you have in your doctor, that you would always want a second opinion. And I believe Emira and Light and Power have appreciated that this can only add value and integrity to the process, and to give those who may be wondering what we are doing the satisfaction that Barbados does not intend to have this repeated going forward. And I better appreciate how the people of New York and other places have felt after their own incidents that would have decimated their cities with total blackouts. Sir?
Thank you, Prime Minister. Let me first start by reiterating our dissatisfaction with the state that we are in right now, but Roger and the team at Barbados Light and Power are a dedicated and committed workforce that have been working tirelessly to keep this event, an event from occurring that's like this. We've been dealing with some extraordinary issues at the plants related to fuel oil issues that we believe is at the root of it. They have unfortunately harmed us to the point that it has caused the interruptions with other issues on the system that we've been able to manage through in the past without a significant effect on the system. Our objective is to make the supply of electricity a seamless interaction for customers, and we have given our commitment to the government, to the Prime Minister and the government here this evening, that we will continue to work with every level of resource that we have available and that we can find to expedite the additional generation that the team has been working on already. They've prepared sites and that work has already been underway, but we will not stop until we have things restored to the state that customers expect, and we have full support and cooperation working with BNOC and the team that we've been talking to in the ministry to work together to try and find solutions as quickly as we can and as effectively as we can, and that's what we're here to commit tonight. But there is one other message, and on top of the recognition of the efforts of our employees of Light, we want to remind the public and our employees to be careful and to ensure that safety is the first and foremost concern on their mind. Knowing that this is an unusual situation for the system to be in, we are asking our employees and customers to be extra cautious around the systems and encourage you to ensure that you take additional precautions while we're in this state.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Any other questions? If none, the last thing, a couple of things that I'd like to do. I really want to thank the people of Barbados. We live in a blessed country. There's so many other countries that would have had a different outturn after the events of the last 2 days. We did not. And I want to thank Barbadians for responding to our calls to allow us to, first to look out for each other. I've had stories throughout the day of people going and making sure that people who lived alone were fine. In some instances, people need electricity for all kinds of things. 2, I want to thank the teams who had worked beyond the call of duty, not just at the Barbados Light and Power. Irrespective of the cause of it, people have worked beyond the call of duty, both there at the Barbados Water Authority and in other critical institutions, in particular the Royal Barbados Police Force and the Barbados Defence Force, who have worked around the clock to keep this country safe. I also want to thank the media for ensuring that we have been able to get as much information out to the people of this country as possible. And I want to thank those, my members of Parliament as well. I gave everybody marching orders this morning to be able to be in their constituencies and to interact with as many people to see what the difficulties are, because we understand that this is a difficult moment for everyone. In life, at 54, I know now that you don't get to plan out your days. We don't get to have sunny days every day, and that we have to take it as we find it. And our character and our resilience is determined by how we respond. I believe that on every occasion, Barbadians rise to the challenge, and I want to thank you really and truly for this. We will continue to monitor the situation. The Barbados Light and Power has the committee that they will interact with over the next 24 hours as required to make sure that any urgent decisions or any feedback that they need from government will not have to wait until they meet with us tomorrow afternoon, when I will see them at 4:30 tomorrow afternoon again. Similarly, that we will have more information, because we do not manufacture generators, so we therefore have to deal with those entities that are in a position to sell the generating capacity. I want therefore to end this evening by asking us to remain safe, to remain vigilant, and to ensure that should this happen again, and I really pray and hope that it does not, that we know what to do in terms of looking out for each other. We're satisfied, however, that we are in a better position given what Light and Power has shared with us to be able to manage the process. There may have to be some load sharing in order to ensure that there is not any peaks, but it is better for us to have load sharing. We as a government have adopted one philosophy: share the burden, or as I like to say, many hands make light work. And if we can share the burden going forward, we can protect the integrity of what we have until the new installation is put in place. Similarly, if we can bleed the tanks, we can ensure that we remove from the equation the contamination for the diesel, the heavy fuel generators, and to the extent that that fuel can be used at all in the future, it would have to be in one of these steam turbines when the tanks for the steam turbines are empty. So, my friends, people of Barbados, we would much rather not have been addressing you at just on to 9 o'clock at night, but it is what it is. We will get through this, and I thank all of the members of the media, Barbados Light and Power, the Water Authority, Barbados National Oil Company, my cabinet colleagues, and indeed you, the members of the Barbadian public, for listening to us and walking through this process. I give you the assurance that every step of the way you will know what is happening. Thank you and God bless. Country, but this government remains on full alert, because until such time as we have the robustness and the resilience of new capacity to the tune of at least 30 megawatts, my cabinet and my government will not rest. But you will work tomorrow. Thank you. God bless.